My husband ended our marriage by text and cleared the savings account. The bank investigation traced every transfer. I read the message at the kitchen table, the phone buzzing once, then going still. My husband wrote that our marriage was over and that we should keep things simple. He said he had already moved money to protect himself. There was no greeting. There was no goodbye. Outside, rain tapped the window like a patient clock. I checked the savings app with shaking hands. The balance that had taken years to build showed 0. I refreshed the screen until my thumb hurt. Nothing changed. The room felt smaller, as if the walls leaned in to hear my breathing. I walked through the house and touched familiar things. The chair he fixed, the photo we framed, the rug my mother sent. Each step felt like stepping on glass. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I left one calm message, asking for clarity, then another asking for time. By nightfall, neighbors' lights glowed while mine stayed off. I sat in the dark and counted the costs I knew and the costs I could not yet see. I promised myself one thing before sleep came. I would not rush. If he chose speed, I would choose patience. That promise steadied me, even as the rain kept time. Morning brought no answers, only quiet. I brewed coffee I did not drink and opened our old folder of bank papers. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. I read dates and numbers until they blurred, then called the bank's helpline with a steady voice I did not feel. The agent listened and asked careful questions. She confirmed the account was empty and said the transfers were recent. She used words like authorization and review. I wrote them down. When I asked how long it would take, she paused. That pause told me more than her answer. I went to the branch after lunch. The glass doors felt heavy. Inside, a teller recognized my name and frowned at the screen. She asked me to sit and brought water. A manager joined us and explained that multiple transfers had moved through linked accounts, fast and clean, like stepping stones across a river. I asked for a record. He said I could request one. I signed the form with careful letters. As I stood to leave, he added one sentence, soft and precise. If anything looks unusual, we escalate. The word echoed as I walked out into the sun. At home, I opened a notebook and drew a timeline. I wrote the date of the text at the top. Below it, I listed what I knew and what I did not. The empty spaces bothered me more than the facts. I filled them with questions. I called my husband again, once. No answer. I did not leave a message. Instead, I checked our joint email. Alerts confirmed transfers I never approved. The amounts varied, small to large, like footprints meant to confuse. I printed everything. A friend stopped by with bread and soup. I thanked her and did not tell the full story. Saying it out loud felt like letting air into a wound. After she left, I sat at the table and matched times on emails with times on bank notices. Patterns formed. Late nights, early mornings, always when I slept. That evening, I found a note taped inside a drawer, written months ago, about moving funds temporarily. I had laughed then. Now I folded the paper and placed it with the records. I realized this was not panic. It was planning. That thought changed the shape of my fear. The bank called the next day. A different voice, firmer, asked permission to open an investigation. I said yes without hesitation. The agent explained they would trace every transfer and notify other institutions. I asked what that meant for the money. He said the process took time. I asked what it meant for my husband. There was another pause. He said the bank followed facts, not feelings. I thanked him for the clarity. When the call ended, the house felt quieter, as if listening. I gathered documents into neat piles. Statements, emails, the note. I labeled each stack. Order calmed me. I cooked a simple meal and ate standing up. Later, I walked the block and breathed in cool air. Each step felt like choosing myself again. That night, a new message arrived from my husband. He wrote that this would be easier if I stayed calm. He suggested I let it go. I read it twice and deleted it. I did not reply. I added the message time to my timeline and underlined it. Sleep came lightly. I dreamed of numbers floating like leaves, all drifting toward the same bend in the river. 3 days later, the bank sent a secure report. I opened it slowly. Lines of text mapped the path of money across accounts I did not recognize. Names repeated, dates aligned. The movement looked neat, almost elegant, until it did not. A note at the bottom explained a discrepancy. One transfer lacked proper consent. Another passed through an account flagged months earlier. I read the sentences again, careful and plain. They felt heavy with meaning. The investigator called to explain next steps. He said they would contact the receiving banks and freeze what remained. He said they would request explanations. I asked if my husband would be notified. He said yes, soon. After the call, I sat by the window and watched clouds slide apart. Relief did not come. Instead, I felt something steadier, like ground underfoot. I knew this was only the beginning. That evening, my phone buzzed. A missed call from my husband, then another. I did not answer. I added the times to my notebook and closed it. The river of numbers was turning back on itself. I could feel the current changing, and I stayed very still, ready for what would surface next. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and checked my phone. There were 5 missed calls from my husband and 1 message that said he only wanted to explain. I did not open it. I made tea and sat at the table with my notebook instead. The bank investigator emailed an update. 2 receiving accounts had been frozen. 1 remained active. The message was calm, almost polite, but the meaning was sharp. Someone was still moving fast. I went back through old mail and found a thin envelope from a year earlier. Inside was a notice about account linking. I remembered signing it without much thought. My husband had handled most of the details then. I circled the date and added it to the timeline. By midday, my husband appeared at the house. He knocked like a stranger. I did not open the door. Through the wood, he said this was a misunderstanding and that lawyers would only make things worse. I asked him to leave. He stood there for a long minute, then walked away. That evening, the investigator called again. His voice had changed. He said they found a pattern that suggested intent. I asked what that meant. He said it meant they would look deeper. When the call ended, I realized my hands were steady. The branch manager asked me to come in. His office smelled like paper and coffee. He laid out printed charts showing dates and arrows. The money moved from our savings to a personal account, then split, then joined again somewhere else. It was like watching a maze drawn by someone who thought no one would follow. He pointed to a late-night transfer. This one, he said, triggered the review. It happened minutes after my husband's text. The timing felt deliberate, almost proud. I asked who owned the final account. He said he could not tell me yet. Rules mattered. I nodded and asked what I should do next. He suggested patience and records. I already had both. On the way home, my phone rang. It was my husband again. I answered this time. He spoke fast, blaming stress and saying he meant to put the money back. I asked why he ended our marriage by text. He said it was easier. I said nothing. Silence stretched until he hung up. That night, an email arrived from the bank's legal team. They requested my formal statement. I began to write, choosing words as carefully as stones placed in water. Writing the statement took hours. I described dates, messages, and permissions in plain language. I avoided emotion. Facts felt stronger. When I finished, I read it aloud once and sent it. The next day, the bank confirmed receipt and thanked me. They said the investigation now involved multiple institutions. That word again, multiple. The scope was growing. I went through the house room by room and gathered anything tied to finances. Old checkbooks, receipts, notes. In a drawer, I found a flash drive labeled backup. I did not remember seeing it before. Inside were scans of documents and a spreadsheet of transfers with notes in my husband's handwriting. Some lines were marked safe. I sat on the floor and stared at the screen. This was not a mistake. This was rehearsal. I copied the files and secured the drive. I added a new page to my notebook and listed every file name. The neatness bothered me more than the theft. That evening, the investigator called late. He asked if I had ever seen a spreadsheet like the one they found. I said yes, today. He went quiet. Then he said they would need a copy. I agreed. When the call ended, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The bank moved quickly after that. Funds in the frozen accounts were secured. The remaining account was flagged and halted mid-transfer. The investigator explained that tracing money was like reading footprints after rain. Some faded, some stayed clear. My husband sent a long message apologizing and asking to meet. He said he felt misunderstood. He said we could fix this. I read it once and archived it. The words felt practiced. A letter arrived by courier from a law office representing the bank. It explained my rights and next steps. It also warned that false statements carried consequences. I felt calm reading it. Truth had weight. I walked to the river near our street and watched the water move around stones. I thought about how long it took to shape a path. Patience mattered. That night, the investigator called with news. They had identified the final account owner. The name was familiar. A friend of my husband from years back, someone who had been at our table. The connection tightened the knot in my chest. The investigator said they would interview him next. I wrote the name in my notebook and underlined it twice. The circle was closing, and I could feel the pull. The interview changed everything. The friend admitted receiving funds but claimed he was holding them. The bank compared notes and found more transfers than he disclosed. The investigator said stories were starting to crack. My husband called again, his voice softer now. He asked if we could start over. I told him the bank was asking questions. He went quiet. Then he said I was overreacting. I ended the call. The bank sent another update. They had recovered a portion of the money. The rest was traced to short-term holdings meant to hide movement. The word they used was layering. I added it to my notebook. That afternoon, I signed a document authorizing the bank to proceed fully. The manager shook my hand and said I had done the right thing. I believed him. As evening fell, a final message came from my husband. He said he never thought I would go this far. I did not reply. I placed my notebook on the shelf and turned off the light. Outside, the river kept moving, steady and patient. I knew now that the current favored truth. And I knew the next turn would be sharper than the last. The bank called early the next morning. The investigators said their review now showed coordination between accounts. He explained it simply, like a teacher. Money had been moved in patterns meant to confuse, but the patterns repeated. That repetition mattered. He asked if my husband had ever spoken about temporary shelters for funds. I remembered the note in the drawer and said yes. The investigator asked me to forward it. I did. Later that day, a letter arrived from my husband at the house. I did not open it. I placed it on the counter where he could see it if he came by. It felt important that I did not touch it. In the afternoon, I received a notice that a formal inquiry had begun. The language was calm but firm. It explained that interviews would continue and that records could be requested without warning. I felt a small lift in my chest. Systems were doing their work. My husband texted again, asking if I had spoken to anyone. I did not answer. Silence felt safer than words. That night, I dreamed of doors opening one by one. Each led to another room with brighter light. I woke knowing that something had shifted. The path forward was narrowing, and there was no way back to where we started. 2 days passed without a call from my husband. Instead, the bank sent updates. They recovered more funds and confirmed that some transfers violated internal rules. Each message felt like a stone added to a scale. I returned to the branch to review documents. The manager showed me signatures and timestamps. One signature matched my husband's. Another did not match mine. The difference was clear even to me. He explained that consent mattered. Without it, transfers could be reversed or flagged for further action. I asked what further action meant. He said the bank would decide. As I left, I noticed my husband sitting in his car across the street. He watched me without waving. I did not stop. The distance between us felt earned. That evening, the investigator called with a new detail. One account had been opened using an address we once shared, but it had been changed recently. The change date matched the week before the text. I added the date to my timeline and circled it, planning again. Before bed, I packed a small bag in case I needed to stay elsewhere. I did not leave. I slept in my own bed and dreamed of water running clear. The next interview brought more cracks. The friend changed his story, saying my husband directed everything. The bank compared messages and found instructions sent late at night. The tone was urgent, almost careless. The investigator asked if I felt safe. I said yes. He said to call if that changed. The question lingered after the call ended. A courier delivered copies of interview summaries. I read them slowly. My husband's name appeared often. His words sounded different on paper, sharper and colder. I received a message from a relative asking if the rumors were true. I replied with one line, "The bank is investigating." It felt like enough. In the afternoon, I noticed a charge attempt on the frozen account. It failed. The bank notified me within minutes. Someone was still trying. That evening, my husband came by again. He stood at the door and said he was sorry. He said fear made him do things. I asked him to leave. He did. I sat at the table and felt a wave of sadness pass through. It did not stay long. In its place came resolve. The truth was moving, and it was not slowing down. The bank escalated the case to their compliance unit. The investigator explained that meant deeper review and wider notice. I asked if that was common. He said only when patterns were clear. A letter arrived confirming provisional credits to my account from recovered funds. It was not everything, but it was something. I felt the weight lift just enough to breathe. I reviewed the spreadsheet again. Lines marked "safe" now felt cruel. Safe for whom? I sent the file to the bank's secure portal and confirmed receipt. That afternoon, my husband sent a message asking to meet with a mediator. I did not respond. Mediation felt premature when facts were still surfacing. The investigator called later with a warning. My husband had requested access to certain records. The bank denied it. The investigator said emotions often rose at this stage. As night fell, I walked by the river and listened. The water moved around obstacles, never stopping, never arguing. I took that lesson home with me. Before sleep, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. Patience is not weakness. I underlined it and closed the book. The next turn felt close. The compliance review produced a summary. The bank found intent to conceal and misrepresent. The words were careful, but the meaning was firm. Consequences were now likely. My husband called once more. His voice shook. He said he was scared. I told him the bank had my statement. He asked what that meant. I said it meant the truth would be heard. That afternoon, I received notice that a formal report would be shared with authorities if required. The bank explained this step existed to protect customers. I thanked them. I returned to the house and sorted papers one last time. I threw away nothing. I labeled everything. Order felt like a kind of mercy. At dusk, a final update arrived. The remaining funds were located but pending release due to review. The investigator said the trail was complete. Every transfer had been traced. I sat quietly and felt a calm I had not felt in weeks. The rush was over. The reckoning was coming. Outside, the river reflected the sky, steady and sure. I knew the hardest part was ahead, but also the most revealing. The truth had a way of finishing what it started. The call came just after breakfast. The investigator said the case had reached a decision point. He explained that the bank's findings showed deliberate action, not confusion. That distinction mattered more than I first understood. He told me the bank would reverse as much as possible and formally notify my husband of the violations. He warned me that reactions at this stage were often intense. I thanked him and ended the call. An hour later, my husband arrived without warning. His face looked pale, and his confidence was gone. He said the bank had contacted him and frozen accounts he depended on. He asked why I had done this to him. I told him I had not done anything. I had only told the truth. He accused me of ruining his life. I reminded him that he had ended our marriage by text and emptied our savings in silence. He had no answer for that. When he left, I locked the door and sat on the floor. My hands shook for the first time in days. Power had shifted, and I could feel the weight of it settling into place. That night, I slept deeply, knowing the storm had not passed, but it had changed direction. The bank sent a formal letter addressed to both of us. It outlined the violations and listed the corrective actions. The language was firm and final. There was no room for debate. Later, the investigator called to explain what would happen next. Some funds would be restored. Others would remain locked until authorities reviewed the case. He said this was standard when intent was proven. I asked how long it could take. He said months, sometimes longer. I accepted that. Waiting no longer frightened me. My husband sent a message saying we should present a united front. I stared at the words and felt something close to disbelief. Unity had ended when trust did. That afternoon, I received confirmation that a large portion of the savings had been credited back to me. I checked the balance 3 times. It was real. I sat at the table and cried quietly, not from joy, but from release. The money mattered, but the truth mattered more. As evening fell, I added one final note to my timeline. Facts prevail. It felt complete. The next development came quickly. Authorities requested copies of the bank's report. The investigator told me this calmly, as if discussing the weather. My heart raced anyway. I was asked to give a short statement confirming my earlier one. I agreed. The process felt careful and slow, like walking across stones in water. My husband called again, this time begging. He said he never meant to hurt me. He said he was under pressure. I listened and said nothing. When he finished, I told him I hoped he would tell the same story to those asking questions. That evening, I noticed how quiet the house had become. The tension that once filled every room had thinned. I cooked dinner and ate at the table, something I had not done in weeks. Before bed, I reviewed the recovered balance and the pending amount. The numbers made sense again. Order was returning. Outside, the river moved steadily under the moon. I watched it for a long time, thinking about how truth, like water, always finds a way forward. News traveled faster than I expected. A relative called, careful with their words. They had heard my husband was in trouble. I confirmed nothing. Silence protected me now. The bank informed me that my husband had challenged the findings. The investigator said the challenge lacked evidence. That mattered too. A notice arrived confirming additional funds would be released once a short hold expired. I marked the date and waited. My husband stopped coming by. The space he left felt lighter. I rearranged the living room and opened windows. Small changes helped. Later, I received an email confirming the challenge had failed. The bank stood by its report. I read the sentence twice, then closed my eyes. That night, I dreamed of standing in clear water up to my ankles, watching the current carry debris away. I woke calm. I realized then that revenge was not loud. It was quiet and exact. It arrived through systems and patience, not shouting. That understanding settled deep inside me. The final steps were coming. I could feel it. The investigator called one last time before the case moved beyond the bank. He thanked me for cooperation and said my records had been vital. I thanked him in return. Later that day, I received the final credit. The savings account reflected what it should have held, minus what remained under review. It was enough. More than enough. My husband sent a final message. He said he wished he had handled things differently. I believed him, but belief no longer required response. I closed the account we once shared and opened a new one in my own name. The clerk smiled and wished me well. The simple kindness stayed with me. That evening, I walked by the river again. The water looked the same as always, yet I knew I had changed. I had learned to trust myself, to wait, to let truth do its work. As I returned home, I felt ready for whatever came next. The investigation had traced every transfer, but it had also traced something else. It had traced the end of one life and the beginning of another. The bank case moved beyond my hands, but its echo stayed close. A letter arrived saying authorities had accepted the report. I was not required to do anything more unless asked. The weight of that sentence surprised me. For weeks, my life had been lists and calls and careful steps. Now, there was space. I spent the day cleaning the house slowly. I wiped shelves and folded clothes that still smelled faintly like him. I did not rush. Each task felt like closing a door with care. In the afternoon, my husband appeared one last time. He stood on the path and asked if we could talk. I stepped outside but did not invite him in. He said he had never imagined things would go this far. I said neither had I. He asked what I wanted now. The question felt late. I told him I wanted peace and truth, and that I finally had both. He nodded, as if hearing a language he had once known. When he left, I felt no anger, only a quiet certainty that the story was almost finished. Weeks passed. The house settled into a new rhythm. Mornings were calm, nights were quiet. I learned the sound of my own thoughts again. A final notice came confirming the last portion of funds would be returned. The explanation was brief. The trail was complete. Every transfer had been traced, every turn mapped. Reading it felt like watching a long road end at the sea. I used part of the money to settle small debts and saved the rest. I did not celebrate. I breathed. A friend asked how I had stayed so calm through everything. I told her I trusted the truth to be stronger than fear. Saying it aloud made it real. One evening, I found the old notebook and flipped through its pages. Dates, notes, circles, and lines. It told the story of patience. I closed it and placed it on a shelf where I would not need it again. Outside, the river ran steady as ever. I watched it and felt gratitude, not for what was lost, but for what remained. The biggest truth arrived quietly. A letter explained that my husband faced further review because the investigation uncovered earlier actions, long before the text. Patterns had been found. The past had caught up. I sat at the table and understood the full shape of it then. If only he had known that moving the money would expose everything. If only he had known that speed leaves tracks. If only he had known that systems remember. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This was never just about money. It was about trust and how easily it can be broken when pride takes over. That night, I slept deeply. I dreamed of standing on the riverbank, watching the current carry truth downstream, shining in the sun. In the morning, I woke with light in my chest. The story no longer felt heavy. It felt complete. The lesson was clear now, written not in anger, but in balance. What is taken in silence returns in truth. I began to rebuild in small ways. I planted herbs by the window. I invited friends for simple meals. Laughter returned. Careful at first, then easy. People sometimes asked if I hated my husband. I thought about it and said no. Hate would have kept me tied to him. I had chosen something else. The bank closed the case officially. The final email thanked me again for cooperation. I closed it and did not look back. I stood in the doorway one evening and looked at the house. It had held sorrow and fear, but it had also held strength. It had not failed me. I realized then that revenge had come, not as fire, but as light. It showed things clearly and let them fall where they should. The river outside caught the last of the sun. I watched until the sky darkened, feeling steady and whole. I stayed. That was the ending. Not because I won, but because I did not lose myself. My husband ended our marriage by text and cleared the savings account, believing speed would save him. He never knew that every transfer leaves a mark. The bank investigation traced everything. More than money, it traced choices, patterns, and truth. I learned that justice does not need noise. It needs patience. It needs courage to wait and strength to stand still. As life moved forward, I carried the lesson gently. What is built on trust stands firm. What is taken through greed always finds its way back. I locked the door that night and turned off the light. Outside, the river flowed on, unchanged and honest. And I knew, without doubt, that if only he had known what he set in motion, he would have chosen differently. But some lessons arrive only after the path is complete.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can catch every daily episode of Revenge with Avenix. You won't want to miss what happens next.